Hello and welcome to I don't know what. Paul and I have been talking about wanting to talk about various things, and we're both trying to write a book or try to write a major thing this year. And we like talking about the things we're doing, and writing is a topic that's interesting to a lot of people. And one of us is writing about poker, and one of us is writing about villains, and both of those things sound kind of interesting. And Paul and I are both egotistical maniacs who think anything we're talking about should be interesting to some people. So we're going to record this and see what the hell happens. I have been mostly not sick for the last couple of days, so of course I'm sick again. My apologies for whatever my voice sounds like. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm physically well. Some might question my sanity in terms of my ability to attach my microphone cable to my mic and
Uh
have
huh.
things like this function. But yeah, things are good. I hope you get well soon. The eternal cycle of sickness is something I don't remember fondly.
Yeah,
But
pneumonia, it turns out, is kind of bad. It's kind of worse than a cold. And I now have a small child who's in childcare. So I
yeah,
recognize that I'm just going to be getting every germ that is going around in my neighborhood for the next couple of years. But
yeah,
we'll see where it goes. So you have some experience with writing. Let's kind of start there. What have you been doing as a writer for most of your life?
sure. So from the time I was pretty little, like, it took me a while to really, like, just, like, start writing, like, literally getting my thoughts down on paper.
Uh huh.
I did look back and I had some little stories I'd written, like, pretty young, but there was one teacher, I'll name her Diana Granite.
Mm-hmm.
She's an author, also, she has a book about China and, like, for kids, like a scholastic kinda book, and somehow she, like, got me to just be like, "Yeah, just put your thoughts down. They don't have to be exactly the way you want them to be, and then
Right.
you can edit them later as you want." And it was, I think, sometime after I read, The Hobbit that I first started thinking about, like, really writing, like, as a writer, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
just to express myself either for school or, in a message or whatever. And I think it was about 13, and one morning I had my computer and I just sat down and just, like, started writing a story.
Yeah.
Um, and ever since then, it's been something in my mind as one of the things I wanted to do.
Right.
And and then I wrote kind of a novella when I was sort of late teens, maybe 20.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple sort of screenplays that I didn't really do anything with here and there. Um, and it wasn't it was something that I always felt like, things I wanted to do were like be a musician. When I was younger, I wanted to be an athlete, and then I did do martial arts, and those felt like things that I kind of had to do at a certain point in my life. And I
Mm-hmm.
always felt a little bit like, well, I could write when I'm 80,
Yeah.
I could write when I'm in my 40s, which I am now. So I'm like, okay, maybe now I should, like,
Right.
actually do the thing.
Well, and let
But
me
yeah,
interrupt a bit because,
sure.
as you mentioned, we are both dinosaurs. For you, and I think you and I both came of age. Like computers became a household thing during the course of our childhoods,
Hmm.
and the internet really became a thing like when we were in high school and or
Yeah.
college. Uh, and so for you, it sounds like though when you first started writing, it was always on a computer of some kind.
No, I'd say that was the first time that I just felt that sort of freedom of, like, I feel like creating a story just spontaneously, and it's easy to just let it flow, and
Right.
just, like, bang out 10 pages without getting up. Before then, I'd written stories on typewriters. Before I had a computer in my home, we had computers at school, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember writing, like, a murder mystery, and in some class, and I think the teacher was like, "Well, it's not that compelling of a mystery if the turns out just like somebody's just like a psychopath, like there's no motive or whatever." Which, we can argue about, but, like, it was just, um, yeah, I'd say, I remember writing on a typewriter. I remember writing stories by hand. The first actual story that you could call a story that I ever
Yeah.
wrote is, like, I have it's between, like, some kind of, we make the cover out of card construction paper, and then the inside is
Oh
is
yeah,
handwriting,
kinda. Uh huh.
so I would say that the access to computers and word processor and, software is what made it feel much more accessible, and
Yeah.
the process of editing is so much easier.
Yeah.
And because the process of editing is easier, I feel like it's actually easier to whip out a first draft
Hmm.
because if we go back to the days of yore when you're literally sitting in front of a blank page, right?
Yeah.
And I think people feel some of this when looking at like a Word document and it's just a bright white screen, or maybe it's, in dark mode, but it's just blank. And I
Hmm.
think some people have like a sort of like, where do I begin
Yeah.
feeling, right? And I have something like that we can talk about later when we're talking about kind of the challenges maybe of like actually doing the thing, right? But when it's a physical piece of paper, I think there actually is a different dynamic to it, because
Yeah.
when you write something on the physical piece of paper, you can't just like go back and fix the spelling. It doesn't auto correct something or auto
Yeah.
incorrect. And it like there's a feeling of permanence, even though still it's a first draft and you can edit and you can retype, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
That process was much more cumbersome, and there was a little more of a feel of finality, I think, to a first draft. Whereas now, um, with computers, it's just so easy to just, if you can just kind of get in that flow and just let the words hit the screen, let your fingers flow, like, or you can even write by voice to text, right? I
Right.
don't know whether you do that or not, but it seems like a good option.
No, and,
And
and that's exactly why I asked, because I was someone who, excuse me, because I was someone who, the first times I started trying to do creative writing, it was all longhand,
Mhm.
and all the things you mentioned are true. But also, I just have terrible handwriting, and
Uh,
my hand starts to hurt pretty soon after I
yeah.
start doing longhand. And so, yeah, for me, it was this pretty miserable experience that then took kind of years to come
Mhm.
back to and realize, wait a minute, if I'm using some of these technological tools, writing doesn't have to be associated with all of that. So
Yeah.
anyway, so go on and keep talking your story about where you got to in terms of
Sure.
how you started writing. But I just thought that was an interesting kind of sideline.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And uh, I'll dovetail into that with this part. I never really liked English class. I never loved
Yeah.
reading a lot of the things like they told you to read in English
Mm-hmm.
class. So we were supposed to take 4 years of English in high school, but the last 2 years I just took creative writing, like,
Okay.
back to back terms with one teacher, then back to back terms with the next teacher. And it was just 2 years of creative writing. And a lot of that was by hand because we would do writing exercises in class. And I had journals. I mean, I still have like a banker's box full of just old notebooks that's all written by hand. And I did write a ton of stuff by hand now that I'm thinking about it. And they would have us do like streams of consciousness. And the thing about streams of consciousness by hand, I always felt like my hand would cramp up then too. And, I mean, I think I had reasonable handwriting, but not,
Mm-hmm.
it compared to typing, I
Right.
mean, I can type 100 words a minute. Like when I'm writing stream of consciousness in Word or something, I can get like 5,000 words in an hour. Like there's no way I could come close to that by hand.
Right.
And so I do think, there's pros and cons to that, where it's like when there is a certain physical effort to committing the words to the page, I think in our first draft, maybe then we work a little bit more at certain things, and maybe the
Mm-hmm.
first draft comes out a little bit cleaner or a little more um like there's a little more effort in everything. But at the same time, I think that effort sometimes can get in the way, and it's probably as much a personal thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, then I didn't do that much writing after kind of like college age until maybe about like 30ish. And
Mm-hmm.
then I started writing about poker. I was posting a ton in forums, and then eventually I saw somebody, a poker coach, write a book, and I was just like, I could write a book. And and
Yeah.
I just like sent them a thing, and I was like, hey, do you want to publish a book? And they're like, what do you want to write? And then I ended up writing a book called Way of the Poker Warrior, which was about basically applying martial arts lessons to poker. And then um, from there, then I was asked to ghostwrite or like kind of like help write a book. And then I about poker with the author whose company I'd gotten published by. And then I was like, um, well, I just want to be an author on the title page. Like I'm a co-author, right? And they're
Yeah.
like, okay, sure. And I think that was like a really interesting experience, that whole thing, because I had contract, I had royalty rates, and there were a bunch of things in the contracts I didn't like. And I did have a friend who was a literary agent, so I asked her, and she's like, yeah, you can just ask them to change this. I was like, okay. So I wrote a long email, and enumerating the points. It was like 13 points, and they're like, yeah, we can change all that. I was like, cool.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately it was like I wasn't asking for a higher royalty rate or anything. I was
Right.
basically just like, hey, I want my name on the copyright. I want this and that and da da da. And so I think that's a good lesson. Like when you want something or something's not the way you want it, like ask, and then they'll either say yes or they'll say no. And if they say yes, cool. And if they say no, then you can decide whether that's acceptable to you or whether you can negotiate somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's
So
such an
yeah.
important point because it's very easy to see these kind of things as a fait accompli. Like they
Hmm.
give you the contract, and well, it's like, oh, okay, so that's how a writer is treated.
Right.
And while granted, there's gonna be a wide difference depending on what kind of audience you're writing from. Everything
Hmm.
from your self-publishing, where you get to do it all your own, versus you're kind of writing in niche audience type things, like what you're talking about, to you're submitting something to Random House or Penguin Publishers or whatever, where
Hmm.
you're gonna have, and you can have very different power relationships wherever it is. But yeah, there's no harm in at least asking and saying, starting a negotiation and saying, hey, can we do it this way?
Yeah, and just not assuming that their first offer is their best offer,
Right.
basically,
Or
or
the
that
final
their
offer. Yeah.
boilerplate language is like immutable, right?
Right.
And obviously, the more power you have in the dynamic, the less power they have. Like the more likely you are to get your way. But especially some of the little things, I think sometimes you can just be like, yeah, can we just do this differently? And they'll be like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we don't really care. It's like, oh, you're not asking for more money? Okay, cool. And sometimes maybe you do want to be asking for more money. That's fine
Yeah.
too, right? Um,
And just to give us an
yeah.
idea of the scale we're talking about, do you know how many copies your most popular book sold?
I don't actually, but I mean, it was in the, like, my first book sold like hundreds, and then the next book was like in the thousand
Uh
whatever
huh.
ranges. And there was the first book by the publisher had sold a lot more. Um, I was they rely a lot on authors to build their own audiences, and
Yep.
I'd been blogging, but I was playing a very niche game. I was playing Limit Hold'em, and so the book I wrote had a lot of Limit Hold'em examples, and
Right.
as a result, it was not as relatable to like the population at large. It was like maybe 10%, maximum 20% of poker players were going to be more oriented toward that. And further, it was mostly online kind of oriented. Whereas,
Right.
the more successful book was, I mean, I co-wrote a book about No Limit Hold'em. I didn't love the kind of approach. It was like correcting a bunch of pieces of advice, and we called it "Don't Listen to Phil Hellmuth," who's like, Phil Hellmuth is a very well-known poker player who's known for just being like this very kind of specific type of kind of unimaginative player. That's
Uh huh.
maybe not totally fair, but he'd written a book or two. They wanted to call it "Stop Listening to Phil Hellmuth," and I was like, guys, no one's listening to Phil Hellmuth.
Yeah.
Like, let's, so I actually ended up naming that one, but from their concept,
Right.
and that was I wrote the book, like I wrote every word of the book, but Dusty, my co-author, came up with, I'd say, 90% of the content, and I kind of added in
Okay.
some math and some other ideas about what poker can be beyond as a game, like being more than a game, and kind of the metaphors that you and I are so fond of.
Yeah. Exactly.
um, so yeah, so these weren't very successful books. I'd say as a professional publisher, I'm sure that they were disappointed with the sales of both. I mean, it also, right after the one came out, we had Black Friday in the United States, where online poker got messed with a lot by the federal government. So
Hmm.
the timing wasn't very good. But also maybe they weren't great books. I think they were very well written,
Hmm.
but I think when it comes to writing a book that sells, there's like two main things, and one is that you are like writing what somebody wants to read, like that they actively want to read, right? Not something that they would enjoy if they happen to find it, but something that kind of like fills a specific need.
Right.
And that was one of the things I didn't like so much about correcting the pieces of advice, because I felt like, why don't we write a book that just tells people what to do rather
Right.
than tells them what not to do? But, you know, they're like, do you want 10 grand for writing a book that like you'll learn some no limit hold'em? And I'm like, yeah, okay, that sounds good, you know? And meanwhile, like if they had been more self-published with less infrastructure and on like Amazon KDP or something, I think those results would have been still not great, but like certainly better, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of the profitability, essentially, right? Because the overhead's so much lower. When you're actually printing copies yourself, it's a little bit of a very different equation.
Right.
Which they did. They were printing copies. And then from there, as I mentioned, there was this Black Friday where all the major sites got shut down in the United States, and I traveled some, and I continued writing some. And I was, you know, you and I were talking about trying to make a company that was kind of like a publishing company, but I think we had very different kind of ideas about how to go about that.
Yep.
And so that didn't really come together, but I did self-publish another book with Dusty that then eventually got picked up by Cardoza Publishing. And he'd actually sold our previous book, the rights to the previous book, to Cardoza without like mentioning it. And I was like, dude, what? Like, so, and that's something that like I probably could have taken some legal action on, but we just kind of worked it out and, you know, and figured it out. I haven't been receiving royalties for any of those 3 books. That book is now titled something like How to Crush No Limit Hold'em or something. But it was written in 2014. So it's probably not super helpful anymore.
Right.
One thing about poker instructional content is that it, especially when it's exploitative, when it's basically telling you, given the way people are playing now, here's how you should play, that can go out of date very fast. That's one of the reasons a lot of poker instructional content is delivered in the form of video, is online. But certain aspects are going to be kind of eternal because they're actually truths about the game that are enduring. So I think there's good parts of all 3 of those books, and I think they might be entertaining reads, but I don't think they're like the best way to learn poker at this point in time. And I'm not currently getting any royalties from them, which I like should be, but I don't know. I have to like do stuff to make that happen. So, if I was better at doing stuff, we'd be talking about the like 20 to 50 books I've published by now, as opposed to like a few. I did make like a flash fiction folio, Zen Madman's flash fiction folio. I do own that one, and it's it's just a bunch of flash fiction. I was just like, writing a novel seems like it takes a lot of time, so I'm just gonna like write a bunch of 1,000-word stories or shorter.
And that's something we'll talk about. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and so then I kind of like wrote a little bit here and there, but in the last decade, I'd say I've published very little, like almost nothing. And aside from some like low content books that I also have out there, which is a whole nother thing when it comes to writing / publishing. That's more of a publishing thing, though it involves some writing. And then recently I've started writing a newsletter / blog titled Friday Night is My Monday Morning, and doing this challenge called Betting the House on Poker. And we can more on that later if you want. But that is my 15-minute long quick summary of my writing origins. Apologies for having written you a 5-page letter. I did not have time to write a 1-page letter.
I get it, and that's something we're going to be talking about a lot, as well as the bouncing back and forth between like, are we writing fiction? Are we writing nonfiction? Especially because I think a lot of people today, when someone says like, I'm a writer or I'm trying to write something, the first thing that they think about is fiction. And for good reason. There's a lot of great fiction being written, and I'm including in there everything from people trying to get stuff published, to fan fiction, to all the different forms of that can take. And for myself, my own writing journey is smaller, but probably has a lot of for myself, my own writing journey is shorter, but has a lot of psychoanalysts thrown in. So we'll see if I can keep it under 15 minutes. But basically, I think, I never really found much joy in writing. In high school and stuff like that, I always hated essays. I loved when I could do oral exams and like have to defend my ideas that way. And then on into college, it was the same thing. And I think part of it was just that I think I was often very intimidated by that blank piece of paper as you're talking about. I was also very intimidated by the finality of it, and realizing that part of what I loved was conversation and dialogue and the chance to sort of, you know, express part of an idea and then have someone kind of be able to get feedback from them of if they understood what I was talking about or not, and then adjust how I was explaining that idea. And a lot of where that started for me was in high school that I joined the debate team. And I found that I really loved that. I loved expressing myself verbally. This is not at all a surprise to anybody who's ever listened to any of my podcasts or ever really spent 5 minutes in my presence. And that continued on through college, where I also did debate. And I went into my first career where I was a community organizer and I was a social organizer and I was trying to do political organizing. And at first there as a community organizer, I was mostly trying to train other people in how to express themselves and do, you know, political speech. And it was a lot of like, there's a little bit of union organizing I did, but a lot of it was like tenant organizing, like organizing tenants to fight against their landlords and stuff like that. And so I did some training in writing and like how to write. And it was much more short form things, but it was, you know, like how to write a statement of demands, how to write a letter to an editor, you know, to or a public statement or a PR statement.
Sure, yeah.
You know, here's how to concisely express your ideas and things like that. And I never really felt love of it, and I never felt like I was like feeding my creative side, but I certainly felt like I was enjoying it. Fast forward on to I go to grad school in order to become a pastor and a social activist. And then I spent about 10 years working at a church, but also working for social justice organizations, primarily one that was interested in reproductive justice. And there I was starting to do a lot of writing, and it was writing aimed at convincing people of things. And so this is everything from you know, again, writing letters to the press, writing press releases. A lot of times, you know, if you're trying to get a city council to vote a certain way or something like that, you might give a public speech, but you're supposed to submit, you know, written testimony, but also things like fundraising letters or like, you know, writing grants where basically you're supposed to kind of write a narrative of like 5 to 10 pages of here's what my organization did with the money you gave me. Here's why you should give me more money.
Right.
And again, I found that I wasn't loving those things, but I was at least good at them. But what I kept finding was that I really loved public speaking. And when I was taught to preach in churches, I had a great opportunity where I went to seminary. It was part of a thing called the Graduate Theological Union, where there was 9 different religious grad schools or divinity schools, or seminaries from different denominations, all kind of working together, along with like a Jewish Center of Jewish Studies, Center of Islamic Studies, a Buddhist Studies. So great ecumenical interfaith kind of education, but it also meant I got to study some of the different skills of the work I was learning with different groups. And one of them was I took my preaching courses at a Baptist school that was primarily from the Southern Black Baptist communities, where the phrase that's often used, it's not exclusive to that community, but it's very dominant there, is preaching without notes, where you're not supposed to have a written speech, but you're supposed to have kind of like an outline in your head, ideas in your head, and then you are kind of speaking extemporaneously. And for some, there's kind of a spiritual aspect to it, of like you're letting the Holy Spirit guide you, but there's also just a lot of like learning audience cues and kind of learning like, you know, how, when there's a lot of eye contact being made, like focus on that thing you're talking about. When people are looking away, like maybe talk about something else, you know? And again, that kind of like creating in the moment, but based on the feedback you're getting from others.
Right.
It's why like there's been a big movement recently of like encouraging people to like very like not interrupt when. Let me actually cut all that out because it's a whole different psychological thing. And so anyway, somewhere along the way, I started realizing that I liked to talk my ideas out a lot more than write them, and that it turns out there's this incredible technology that lets you record something while it's being spoken.
Right.
And so one thing I would start doing more often is, even when it was something that I had to write and was never going to speak out loud, like a fundraising letter, I would start giving it as a speech to myself. In order to not drive crazy the people I was living with, my shower time, or when I'm doing like laundry or dishes often became the time I was doing this. And I would like practice it a couple of times and get it to a point I liked. And then I'd have it in my head enough that I could then kind of like recite it again in my head as I'm writing. And wouldn't be word for word. It would be different each time. And I would then polish it more as I was writing. But I found that kind of method of speaking it and then taking a speech or a sermon or just ramblings, and then maybe with a recording or maybe just because I knew it well, turning that into the written word worked really well for me and was something I enjoyed a lot more. And I think that's a big part of what led me to podcasting, because podcasting is, at least the way I do it, 90% of the time is conversational.
Yeah.
And like right now, you and I are kind of giving long speeches back and forth, and we'll definitely do that. We enjoy that.
Yeah.
But often there's a lot of kind of back and forth and questions and stuff like that. And I found that I would always enjoy my thoughts more along that way. But also that, I enjoyed that finality of the written word, even though, again, I could go back and edit it. And I know that one of the best writing advices out there is just write, don't try to edit yourself as you go, and then go back and edit. Because as you kind of alluded to, editing utter crap is still a lot easier than a blank page, you know, for many people.
It can be. It can. It depends kind of like what grade of crap we're talking. But
the grade of crap might be like, oh my God, this is so terrible, I'm just going to go eat Doritos.
And they're like,
entirely.
Now we have a blank page again. I've edited it.
Exactly.
But yeah, for sure.
And so I think that's where I've kind of come to, and now where most of my writing, and I think that's where I've kind of come to. And a part of the impetus for this was that a couple of years ago, I started to think, hey, what if I did take some of the ideas that we're expressing here and turn them into a book of some kind? It had been an idea kind of playing in my head for a while, and then someone else wrote a book literally called Superhero Ethics, which most of you probably know me from that, but those who don't, I have a podcast called Superhero Ethics.
How do the politics of this show and this book line up? Are they similar?
Differ fairly significantly.
Oh, really? Okay.
I haven't checked in on him for a while, but I know he's there's a lot about kind of Superman as like Ubermensch, and like not Ubermensch, but like that, like a strong idea of masculinity that the world needs and stuff like that. And I thought briefly about trying to kind of protect my copyright, but realized I'd never kind of really legally established it, and it wasn't worth fighting about it. And I have superheroethics.com, which I think is kind of like the most important villain.
That's the final word in today's world.
Exactly. But that got me thinking about it more. And then really in the last couple of months, really started thinking, wait a minute, I have now put out more than, I think, 600 episodes of content about these various things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff I can go back on and look at and edit and start thinking about, what can I do with this? Can I turn this into writing? And so I decided that this year, 2026, I'm going to write a book. And I'll talk about that more in a second. And then I decided that, why do something by myself when I could talk about it with people and get other people to listen to it? And so I approached Paul and said, hey, Paul, you're thinking about doing some writing this year. What if we kind of do a weekly podcast, very kind of loosey-goosey, but where we just talk about both the writing process, but also the topics we're writing about, because they're both topics that we like talking about and that we think other people might be interested in.
And at that moment, Paul realized what the podcast was actually about. I love a lot of what you just said, which isn't to say that I don't love the other parts, but just that they're specific things. I think it's as soon as you started talking about having a podcast, and when we recorded the first episode of Superhero Ethics, which I believe I also didn't know we were recording a podcast at the time. At least this time I do know it's a podcast. You were like, do you want to just get on a mic and talk about Batman? I was like, sure, of course I do. Our conversation should be recorded for posterity.
There's a lot of times where I pull tricks on Paul out of ignorance, not malfeasance. And so I think I thought you realized that would be a podcast, not that I intentionally tricked you. But
yeah,
yes,
no. Yeah. Sorry if that's how it came off. I mean, it was more. I was like, oh, so that's what this is. Okay, yeah, cool. You know, like I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think like the idea of like shooting a pilot and then being like, oh, by the way, that's the final cut, and it's like, oh, really? Okay, well, it came out good, cool.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's not like you just published it and I was like, wait, what happened? You know. But I think as far back as that, which was, I believe, now in the realm of a decade, right?
Yeah,
is it
like
over a decade now? It's around a decade-ish, right? Yeah. I don't know if it was 15 or 16, but it was some time ago.
Yeah.
I remember immediately thinking like, well, why not turn these ideas into a book? You know, like, and I think we kind of like talked about it loosely, but then, you know, just didn't really do the thing, you know? And so, I'm very happy to see you doing that now. And I'm looking forward to reading it. And, I think there is something to be said for like, I do like the idea, kind of the model of, you know, having an idea, talking it out some, and then kind of codifying it in the written word, you know, where there is something about like a book. When you print a book, and I should, hey, I have one here actually. I'm like, I didn't even realize this is a book. It's printed. Like these ideas here in the beginning, like they're written down in a specific form, you know, and it's like there's a level of kind of like committing to the idea, you know, and like really working it through, right? Because I think what happens a lot in podcasting, which I think is very cool, is one or more people come into the episode with the idea, with some ideas in their mind, and then toss them back and forth and kind of make some progress in one direction or another. But I know I'm not just speaking for myself when I say at the end of every podcast episode, there are a ridiculous number of thoughts I have afterwards that I wish I had expressed, right? And of course, that can happen after you publish a book as well. But one of the nice things about the written word, and I mean, this can apply to the spoken word as well, depending on how you go about your business. But like one of the nice things is you can write down your ideas. You can get feedback from like maybe an editor, and then you can go, this was unclear, or, oh, maybe actually this isn't this way and I want to change that this way. And you can make adjustments. You can make large edits. You can make small edits. You can make copy edits, right? You can make content edits. And ultimately you end up with something that I think is probably usually closer to like a complete expression of what you really mean. Like to me, that's kind of the goal of publishing something in writing, right? Is to like get around to kind of the truth of like what I want to express and then getting it out there in exactly that form. Like right now, I'm improvising, right? I'm just saying things that make sense to me right now. When I listen back, a lot of them I'll go like, oh yeah, totally. Oh, I like how I said it. And then I'm like, oh, I should have mentioned this, or like, oh, actually, you know what? Maybe this instead. Or like, you know, there's podcast episodes where I think back and I'm like, that was the wrong word. I hate that I used that word there. And that might seem like a weird thing, but it's like, and maybe it's like a very writery thing, you know, but like, I think that the publishing process, the writing, not just the writing the first draft process, the writing the first draft process is like the coming up with an idea for a podcast, right? The editing process is kind of like what happens while talking about the ideas in the podcast. But then with the written word, you can then go, okay, well then what I'm going to actually put out into the world is going to be adjusted based on all of that feedback. And whereas with the podcasting, it's like the whole process is kind of out there, which is its own kind of cool, right? Like I think there's value to both, but to me, that's kind of a little bit of sort of what the difference is. And I think the kind of intimidation factor, the reason that I haven't written a lot of the things I've wanted to write throughout the decades, really, is that I want it to be exactly the way I want it to be. And I feel like
Yeah.
once I publish something, there's this finality to it. And I think the gap in my personal process is forgetting that when I'm writing the first draft, like not a word of that draft needs to be in the final draft, right? And so like failing to recognize that first draft as a tool that will eventually lead to a final draft, and having kind of publishing anxiety, that's a different story, right? That's like, okay, is this really exactly the way I want it? And I think even there, like there needs to be a willingness to let go and say, okay, that's as good as it's gonna be now. And I'm gonna put it out into the world, and then I'm gonna make the next thing, right?
Yeah, there's a saying in I've heard it in preaching, but I think it's probably repeated in a lot of different writing, creative kind of ideas. Of there's no such thing as the final draft. You just present whatever draft you're up to when it's due.
Sure, yeah.
And because I get that, and it's funny because I talked about sort of the finality of the written word, and of course the spoken word actually in some ways is much more final. This is being live streamed. No one's watching it right now, but hopefully in the future it will be, and it will exist. And then when I publish it as a podcast, I'll edit it a little bit and clean up some of the ums and ahs and stuff like that, but it'll still be mostly as we spoke it. We won't be able to edit it the way we could the written words. So
right.
And I think this is kind of our intro, so we're going longer than we probably will. My hope is that a lot of these episodes are going to be kind of around the half-hour length.
Mm-hmm.
Given, Paul, if you listen to the history of superhero ethics, and as a drinking game, take a drink every time Paul and I say we will set it to this time limit and then pass that time limit, then I hope you have a liver donor on hand because you'll be drinking a lot. But trying to move to, if this kind of is our intro, Paul, what are your writing goals for 2026? What are you trying to do?
Yeah, so I have one very concrete goal, which is just to publish my thing. Friday night is my Monday morning, every Friday at 5 p.m. for the duration of the year.
Right.
That's my one stated goal. And if I do nothing else but that, I will view the year as a success, writing-wise.
And what's the subject of that blog?
Right. So it's poker. And it's there's a sort of sub thing called betting the house on poker, wherein I am chronicling my attempt to basically win a house in 33 months. That's my goal, is to, and technically it's to win enough money that after taxes I can pay off the balance of the house, but the total of that exceeds the value of the house. So it's basically, I'm trying to win a house. I'm not really at risk of losing a house, so it's a little less dramatic than the title makes it seem, right?
You're not taking out a second mortgage as your stake.
Correct. And I mean, I'm not playing that high stakes. I'm playing online no limit cash games, which you just get a lot of volume. So you play a ton of hands, and then you kind of get like a high multiplier of like how much you're winning per hand, right?
Right.
But so a lot of that is about the kind of sort of mental game, psychological journey of trying to move through the stakes and working on skill acquisition, trying to get better every day, every week. Progress isn't linear, but as long as we put in the effort consistently in an effective way, then progress should kind of compound and just really take off at some point. Because it's not the journey of just like someone who's super good at a particular format of poker, just playing a ton of volume. It's the journey of somebody who's pretty good at a particular format of poker, trying to get really, really good at it and put in a ton of volume eventually. And so, yeah, it's mostly about that. I'm kind of toying with the idea of making it a little more helpful, where it's more oriented towards, here's something I thought about this week that I believe can help you if you're a poker player, or maybe even just somebody trying to improve your performance in any skill, really.
Right.
So that's kind of my undergirding kind of goal, where it forces me to do some writing every week, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like that's a really good. People talk about like write every day, write 1,000 words a day, or another thing, just write 100 words a day or whatever. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that works for some people. I've known professional writers who that's just what they did, and they didn't do that, right? They were like, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I write 10 hours a day, sometimes I write none. I mean, when I've written books, I've written them very fast. And generally it's just when I really get going, like I'm gonna write I could write 5, 10,000 words a day. Like if I decided all I was going to do was write and I was able to get in that mode, like I could probably publish a book a week. But and so whenever I think about doing it, that's always what I think about, right? Which is then like that's it's not great. I mean,
Yeah.
that would be fine. That would be okay if that's what I want to do. And maybe after my 33 months of winning a house, I'll decide that's what I want to do. But I'd say this year, my kind of secondary goal is I would like to publish at least one high content book, because I have been publishing these like lower content books where I'll just demonstrate this one as an example, not so much to try to sell it. It's called Learning Texas Hold'em, which is really just because that's good SEO in the Amazon store, and then blank preflop ranges. And there might be like more to the subtitle. I don't remember. Like you basically need to like stuff keywords in there. But now like they don't want you to do that as much. And you have to like pay attention to what the algorithm is. Like if you do TikTok or you do YouTube or you do anything online, right, where you're trying to get clicks, which essentially when you're selling books, you're trying to get clicks. You're trying to get somebody to click on your thumbnail, which is your cover, and then you're trying to convert them, right? But unless they click on it, like they're not going to buy it. They need to find it and look for it, and then.
And I'm sure that's something we're going to talk about a good deal, is the business of writing as well.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited for this journey of yours, in part because I am a poker player. I want to get better. I'm not a professional the way you are. It's not my main source of income. I play primarily socially, but I would like it to be I enjoy the fact that I'm at a point where it's pretty much about net zero, slight positive in terms of like the money I spend on poker, that overall I'm more winning than a losing player. But I think even more so because, and this is again something that if you listen to Paul and I talk on podcasts, poker is something that has become really kind of like a language of metaphors that we use an awful lot. And that at one point we were talking about trying to do a podcast about that, about teaching others that. Then I think that like there's a lot of things that poker teaches you about everything from probability and better understanding that to self-discipline and kind of recognizing intrusive thoughts and cognitive biases and all that kind of stuff that helps you a lot in life. And I don't know how much of that's going to go into your writing, but I certainly know that a lot of it's going to be in our talking about it each week. And so that's something I'm pretty excited about, as well as just also just, all the things. Because I think at this point, like, for me, there's an extent to which I play poker and I love poker, but also poker is just a part of our world at this point. And it's a sport in terms of it being something that people often know the names of the best players and they follow. Like, do you remember this famous game or this famous, poker tournament and stuff like that? And there's some sports that I really love, and there are other sports where I don't really know what MME is, much about mixed martial arts, MMA, but I want to know at least enough of the basics so that when my friends are talking about the water cooler, I can follow it. And I think that with poker as well. For myself, I'm going to be trying to do a more traditional book, but it is going to be very much based on the podcasting stuff that I've been doing, especially with superhero ethics, which is that, and I don't know what the title is going to be yet, but it's going to be something like the Professor Magneto School of Ethics. What can we learn from villains? Because anyone who's listened to my podcast knows that I love heroes, but I'm especially fascinated by villains. And the real sea change that I think has happened in the last 20 or 30 years or so in terms of how villains, especially in kind of genre movies, and these terms are ones that I'm going to have to define in the book, and that's going to be a whole conversation. But, things like science fiction, fantasy, spy novel kind of thing, this kind of stuff, superhero stuff, where we've really gone from kind of the poles that I sort of see are kind of like the mustache twirling villain who wants power for the sake of power and we all hate and we want to see get defeated, all the way to the very sympathetic villains where you somewhat wonder, like, are they kind of right? Like a Magneto or a Killmonger or someone like that. And to me, this is just such a fascinating topic. And so my goal is to write that. And because this is a nonfiction book and one where a lot of these ideas I've talked about before, where I am in my process right now is I'm kind of doing two things. One is that I've been kind of in my head mentally rehearsing some of the chapters. And so I've been starting to write those. So I have like 3 pages of kind of an intro written down on a Google Doc. And I have a how to classify villains thing mostly in my head that I'm going to start putting on paper. At the same time, I have kind of like a table of contents. And so probably what my process is going to be, but I'm going to talk about it a lot week to week, is get as much of the stuff that's in my head now out on paper, and then step back and do research. And a lot of that research is going to be going back. There's now wonderful software that will take the audio recordings of my of our podcasts and mine, because a lot of them you're not on.
Sure, yeah.
And turn them into transcripts, and then I can read them and stuff like that. And then a lot of it's also going to be going to my former co-hosts and being like, hey, you said this cool thing.
Yeah.
Do I have your permission to put that in the book and all this stuff?
Sure, yeah.
But also, I'm not the first person talking about this by any means. I think I have a kind of unique perspective in what we've done with the podcast, but other people have written books about villains. And so I want to also take some time. And that's everything from like, Aristotle writing about like the different roles in drama to people today writing literal books about Magneto or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the process also is going to be kind of researching that stuff so I can really situate my book in the midst of the conversations that are already happening. As for what kind of book it is, that's one thing I'm really wondering about. There's a publisher that I have some connections to through Professor Matthew Capel, that who's been a guest on here. He's fantastic. And they kind of publish academic level works with like full citations and all that kind of stuff on pop culture. So it's about like the philosophy. He did a book on the sort of philosophy and anthropology of the Horizon Dawn games, for anyone who knows those video games. I might go in that direction. I might try to make it much more pop culture-y, and much more of kind of like a coffee table book or something like that, or not a coffee table, but just kind of like a more casual thing. I don't know yet. And so there's a lot that I'm trying to figure out as I go, but my goal is to have that at least have a first draft done by the end of the year, but ideally to have something that is edited enough that I can take it to potential publishers and quite likely get told, you have a great idea for a book here, but you have to do all this work to change it. So it won't be a final draft necessarily, but it'll be a kind of like ready for others to see draft.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to reading some of the ideas, even if I heard a lot of parts of the ideas along the way.
Yeah.
I will say, when it comes to publishing nonfiction, a lot of nonfiction gets published not as here's a finished manuscript, or like first draft or second or whatever draft gets presented to a publisher, but often through a book proposal, which can be, I know mine was basically they wanted 2 chapters and an outline.
Yeah.
And to basically be like, okay, what are you going to talk about? What's the structure? And then, what's it actually going to look like? A couple segments of it. Right. So obviously you should go about it however you want, but, and it sounds like maybe the writing process is going to involve some exploration along the way of kind of what direction you want to take. Maybe you'll find that out as you're writing, but just also to just put it out there that there is always the option of like getting a deal before you have a book. Like I didn't have a book when I got a deal. I was just like, I have an idea, and they're like, okay, write a book proposal. And I was like, okay, here's 2 chapters. Here's the outline you asked for. And they're like, okay. And then we got a deal, and then we started working on the book.
Right.
And usually then there's a deadline though. And
I had gotten to the point with the publishing company where that's where they had told me what they would want.
Sure. Yeah.
And certainly the kind of like the chapters that I'm writing right now.
Yeah. Could be.
Yeah, and I don't know, I probably didn't mention it, but yeah, I want to have a written out kind of outline and table of chapters and stuff like that. For me, there's kind of 2 concerns there. One is just if they reject it and say, we don't want this, is that a hurdle for me to not keep writing?
Right.
The other thing, though, is that I'm at a point in my life where I have other responsibilities, other employment stuff, but also I am primarily the homemaker, and I have a 6-month-old child. 6-month-olds are not very good at listening to, hey, do you mind if Daddy kind of ignores you for a couple hours and focuses on his work?
Right. Sure.
And I think one of the concerns that I have, yeah, you're right, is that if I get, for me, I've always wrestled with accountability, and saying to my listeners, and right now maybe no one listens to this, but I'll at least put this out on my
listening.
Superhero Ethics
I'm
feed.
listening.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm accountable to you. I'm accountable to those listeners.
Yeah.
If I sign a contract, now I'm a lot more accountable.
Sure.
Especially if I get in advance, which I would have to give back if I don't finish.
Yeah.
Granted, at my level, the chance of me getting in
Probably
advance
not much
is
of an
pretty,
advance.
Pretty darn small.
Pretty unlikely.
Maybe they send me like a $10 DoorDash card or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But still, it is still and that's a mark against me if I try to get something published 3 years from now. So I feel like I want to see where I am and see how I'm feeling about the writing process at the time that I've finished what they would want as a proposal. And
that's very logical.
Yeah, and I think I'll probably come and talk about it here and talk about it with some others in sense. So is it now worth trying to take this to some others and get and that kind of thing?
Yeah. And then there's also I don't think you mentioned this as a possibility, but there's self-publishing.
Yeah.
I've put out maybe a dozen books in one format or another myself. My wife has published over 1,000 by now.
Right.
Hers are predominantly low content. But if you have a book and you say this is the finished product, this is the book I want, we can make that into a book that you can sell for whatever price you choose. And then you have an audience, you have a platform reach. And that's one of the most important things in terms of actually getting sales. So, that's not to say that you shouldn't pursue a publisher, but just definitely that there is a good range of options in today's world where if you have an idea that you want to publish, you just get to publish it now.
Yeah.
And
I think that's something that's also made so much easier by where we are technologically, because
absolutely.
There are ways that you can pay a company that has a printing press to physically create a physical copy of a book. But also, I'll say I will say for myself, for example, 95% of the books that I read on my Kindle.
Oh, sure.
And it is certainly also very possible to self-publish a book which never exists in a physical holdable format.
Yeah.
What you've done is to publish an ebook that, because that's where a lot of people consume content. And I think that's one thing also that you and I may discuss back and forth is that a fictional novel, I think, works really well in that context.
Yeah.
A book that is for pleasure reading and is nonfiction, I think, can also work in that. If it's aimed at a more academic audience where people might want to highlight it and quote it and stuff like that, there's more of a need. I think there are some
for sure,
and where your works fall, I imagine, is a range, but there are some poker books that I have bought that I would never want in an online version because I want to be able to have a a chart open at a certain time and flip back and forth easily in ways that are harder. So I think that's one more thing we'll be talking about is that there's all these different publishing options, and whether you're going physical or electronic, or since I love the sound of my own voice, I could narrate my book and create an audio
exactly.
book. And again, an audiobook is fantastic for some formats. For something where you want to have a chart to refer to.
Yeah, not great.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
I think that'll be another fun part of the conversation.
Absolutely. One other note on, you were talking about villains and types of villains and, the ones who just want unlimited power. The phrase unlimited power, which, I think it's a good time to plug your other podcast, right? Which I think is now Star Wars Generations.
Star Wars Generations, yep.
Yeah.
Unlimited power is what Palpatine shouts when he has gotten Anakin to cut off Mace Windu's arm after the biggest unneeded wind-up in the history of sword fighting. And he sends unlimited power as he twirls his non-existent mustache and shoots lightning out of his fingertips. You know who used that expression extensively in the 80s and 90s? Who's that?
Bob Ross. He's
That's
talking about the
hilarious.
joy of painting, and he's like, on the on the canvas, you have unlimited power. You can move mountains. He's like, this tree needs a happy little friend, and I have unlimited power. I mean, he doesn't say it that way, but
That is, and considering that like the line we're talking about comes from the prequel movies, so it
Yes,
comes after that.
exactly.
I really kind of hope that someone,
Right?
someone in the prequel writing was like, what if we take this line from the sweetest, nicest guy
Yeah.
ever and make it like the key, like, I have global fascistic power. I love
Yeah,
that.
like George Lucas was just sitting there watching the joy of painting, to relax between drafts of Revenge of the Sith, and then he was like, unlimited power. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Yeah.
But Paul, for people who are interested in what you're doing and want to kind of read this blog, where do they go?
Yeah, you can go to zenmadman.com and you can subscribe to the mailing list, or you can just check in and read the blog week to week. Either way works.
Cool. We'll have a link to that in the show notes, of course. And of course, most of where you can find my stuff is my podcasts. If you go to theethicalpanda.com, you'll find the 3 other podcasts that I'm a part of. Actually, 4, I should say, because I am the host and creator of Superhero Ethics and Star Wars Generations. I am one of the co-hosts and co-creators of the Once in the Future Parent. And I am also, and should have been advertising this more probably, but I'm one of the co-hosts right now of the Marvel Movie Minute,
Oh,
where we look
yeah.
at Marvel movies now 5 minutes at a time instead of 1
Ah.
minute at a time. We just did Thor: The Dark World, which was kind of a like I don't want to claim like cultural appropriate other people's cultures, but like in a lot of cultures, there's sort of like a ritual of suffering that you have to go through as part of personal growth, and that's how I'm going to view that. But now we're going to do Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Oh.
I think it's one of the best movies. So that's going to be coming out weekly. Also, you should check out. We should have something on the Ethical Panda page about that. So check out all that. Let us know what you think. This is a completely new format. This is probably gonna be kind of like maybe like prologue episode.
Mhm.
Paul and I are just
Episode 0.
Yeah, Paul and I are just trying this out. We'll probably record a couple episodes, and after each one, go, I didn't like that part of the format. Let's do it this way, and eventually fall into what will be a podcast that hopefully you enjoy, and we would love to get your feedback on. So, on behalf of Paul and myself, thank you so much. Pick up your pen, start writing.
Word.
Many of them.